And hello, everybody. Welcome to the most important conversations with Jenna Smith and myself. We're talking about relationships as usual on our weekly podcast. Jenna, how you doing today?
Good.
Good, good,
Just
good.
coming
We were
off from
just
a
have,
talk about problems and dealing with problems. So like we're good, but we're dealing with things.
yeah, no, we're good, but we're dealing with things, and we decided to just get into it and invite those listening into what we were just talking about, which was this lingering trauma response that is now, for the moment anyway, I'm not sure if it's a long-term thing or how we resolve it. We can talk about that. But this lingering trauma response from COVID, actually, from going through a once in a century pandemic and all of the uncertainty that that brings up for every human being, and it shows up in different ways, but the uncertainty about, well, what is the future look like? Why did this happen? And I know we're all tired of talking about COVID, and there's like, wasn't that 2 years ago? But what we're talking about is the lingering trauma thing, like the effect it had on us as a society and as on us as individuals, and how that is playing out in our relationships, relationships to ourself, relationships to others, relationships to work, relationships to money, relationships to everything. We are always in relationship to something. And when we're in relationship to things and we are coming from a trauma response, behavior can start to look really crazy.
Yeah.
And even to us, we might be like, why did I do that? Or why am I feeling this? Or why am I thinking this? You know? And so we have to, so this, what we're talking about today is, you know what, let's just acknowledge this is still going on. COVID, the physiological piece may be sort of under control and just sort of a managed thing now, like a cold or a flu. But the what happened to our psyche, to our emotions, to our relationship to ourself over those 2.5 years, that's still here with us. And it's showing up in the weirdest ways. So that's what we were just talking about. Jenna, what have you been seeing and what are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, I'm just gonna first say to like debunk the word trauma. People are really overusing it. The after effects of fear that haven't and hasn't been brought to wholeness. So we're trying to race forward with like a Mack truck behind us. And so most people are just like, I'm fine now. There's no more band. There's no more this. There's no more that. Like whatever the thing is. I'm fine, let's go. But all of the trauma, the unprocessed emotion, the unprocessed energy is still in our system and it's still occurring as an experience of fear. So I'm just going to
Mm,
call it fear. We
yeah.
have fear in our body. And when humans are in fear, they shrink and they contract and they're selfish and they're self-absorbed, like whether or not you want to see yourself that way. We all are mammals. We were talking about
Hmm.
squirrels, like these are my nuts.
Hmm.
If the squirrels all have enough nuts, they're not going to fight.
Right.
If there's not enough nuts, oh, I mean, I've read squirrels here, they're very chatty.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
fighting over the nuts. So that's what humans are reduced to, but then they kind of delusionally pretend that they're not. Oh, I'm fine because everything's fine and I'm fine, and it's like, no, you're not.
Mm,
And you can
mm,
see it in your relationship to all the things, the money,
mm.
how relationships are transpiring. Just kind of people in survival act really weird. It's like a global midlife crisis in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
it's so big that they can't wrap their mind around it, so they don't, and then they just do what's in front of them and pretend they're fine.
Right. And I think there was this compulsion that we all had to just get back to the way it was before the pandemic, right?
Yeah,
It was like we could just go back.
yeah.
And that's kind of the same if I can bring it down to sort of on a microcosmic level. So there's some tragic event, some traumatic event that happens in your life. There's a death. Okay.
Mhm.
And there were many deaths during COVID, millions. But
Mhm.
let's just say on a personal level, there's a death, and going through the grief process is something that we as human beings can't avoid. And part of the grief process is longing for before the death, before this thing happened. If we could just go back, if things could just go back to the way they were. And so that collective experience that we were all having during COVID, and then COVID ends, and there's this like, oh, great, we can go back to normal. But we didn't process and go through the grief of the loss of a loss of physical life, the loss of habituated life, like what we did in an average day. I mean, it wasn't normal for kids to be out of school. It wasn't normal for us to be trapped in our homes. It wasn't normal for us to not be able to interact with people and to have to wear masks and all of this kind of stuff. And so in those 2.5 years, there's a grief that starts to come up about what we're dealing with. And then as soon as it ends, the desire to just rush back without finishing that and allowing that, well, it's going to finish itself, whether you like
Oh
it or
yeah.
not.
You can't like pretend it's not there. I call it moldy boxes in the basement. Sometimes like emotional healing. You put the box in the basement, then you put okay, there's some pain, there's some disappointment. Oh, we don't have time to deal with that now. So it's like truck forward. I'm fine. There's a certain point where you just can't be fine anymore. Like the buildup is now starting to spill over in like
Yeah.
fatigue or depression. That's when people have been like, oh, I'm depressed. What's wrong with me? Well, let's look at everything you've repressed and put down that's now spilling over to your attention to be brought into more wholeness. But,
Right.
the desire to go back is the mind's, the left brain thinking mind's desire to make sense. We talked about this, the desire to make sense of something in order for you to accept it. There's just a lot of layers there, but the desire to go back, I see this a lot with people who've had affairs before, but they're also romanticizing it because our memories are not real. Like people
Right.
see
Right.
memories, like if when you actually, there's so many studies on this that I don't know the exact facts of it, but your memories are a hodgepodge of like how you remember that thing. And then you can go and talk to somebody else and be like, oh no, actually it was a green car, or like, there's this skewed idea of memory. But I see all the time, like before the affair, we were like this. And then I'm like, is that true? You start looking at it and like, what is that true? And then when they really look at it, they're like, actually, no, this was always this way. Like it wasn't a
Right.
romanticized better before thing. So I see people always want to go back out of their desire to not deal with what's here and their lack of
Right.
capacity to deal with what's here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's also the way we're relating to your point of say 2019 and everything before that. The other thing that we just do actually get addicted to. So I know for those listening, you might relate to the word addiction through sort of a negative connotation, but really addiction is just reinforced behavior. And wanting that behavior over and over and over again. It's reinforced. We get a pleasure payoff through the neurochemicals in our mind. And so that's addiction. I can get addicted to healthy things that are positive and advancing my life. I can get addicted to things that are destroying my life. And we got addicted to how life was before COVID because it was predictable, it was safe, it was knowable. And we've talked before about how human beings they don't typically do very well with the unknown, surrendering to the unknown, developing trust of self versus trying to develop control over all of the variables of life. I mean, that's just crazy making because no one controls all of the variables of life. The only thing we control is who we're being and our response to what's happening. That's, the responsibility. And so we knew how life worked pre-COVID, and we were like, let's just make that how it works again. But we're not dealing with the fact that COVID, like it or not, changed so many things about how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to work. Think about the Great Resignation, people not going into work anymore. COVID presented an opportunity. It was like hitting a big pause button for 2.5 years, where people started to question what is really important to me? What do I value? What do I want to spend the rest of my life doing? And
And
so
why
just
are we
before
married, right? Like,
well,
why are
there's
we
that. Why are we married? Why am I in this job? Why am I living in this city? Like, there are lots of people moving out of cities during COVID. Like we tend to want to forget all of those things that happen, but those have fundamentally created the world we're now dealing with. The world we're now dealing with is not the world of 2019 and pre-COVID. It is a very different world. We're talking about economics are changing. We're seeing trends in the political world moving away from globalization and this sort of the world is one interconnected human family to more of, no, this is my country, that's your country. This is the same fear thing you're talking
Fear.
about. This is
Yeah,
my
it's just
money, this is
fear.
your
Yeah.
money, right? So it's just fear showing up everywhere. It's showing up in our politics en masse as a society, and it's also showing up on an individual level. And I was just sharing with you before we started, I'm involved in a lot of different tech projects and have been over the years. And we have, a tech project that we've been, we've raised money for and we're moving to the next level. But I've just noticed a very bizarre behavior over the last 2 years now, since sort of mid 2022, of investors sort of wanting to move forward like they would have before COVID, and then at the very last minute retracting and freaking out and disappearing, literally disappearing. It's weird behavior. But when you and I were starting to talk, you're like, yeah, but that's not just happening in the financial communities. It's happening in relationships. It's happening all over the place. People are still in fear, but they don't want to acknowledge it. So we tell ourselves rational lies. We rationalize our behavior so that we don't have to address the fear, the grief, and whatever else is going on for us.
But they don't even know they're rationalizing. They're not thinking about it. They're reacting. They're living a reactive, delusional life because that's just all they have. So, there's a certain point in trauma where the beauty of trauma is that you get to move forward with your wound because you need to survive. So we're talking about survival instincts, survival mechanisms in humans, which are, selfish, aggrandizing, insecure, like how humans behave when they're in fear isn't our best self. And we can't logic our way out of it. So the other part is my entire business, the resourcing method is managing, taming, and training the mind that we've been overly dominant in, left brain thinking, which you talk about too, increasing the resources of the body, the heart, and the spirit.
Right.
No one cares about their spirit when they're in fear. They care about the threat.
That's right.
Whether they're aware of it or not. Like, that's the story. I need to just make, 50 more thousand in this quarter and now you're back to this transactional living of I will feel good when, and once
That's
this,
right.
that. All of that sucks. No one's present, no one's vital, no one's alive, no one's creative in that state. But then they're trying to fix the void of that aliveness and creativity and connection, also connection with the stuff, or with the, if I fix this then, or if white people did this and these people did that, and if this had, like, the mind will blame, the fear mind will blame. And then you're just in that loop. And then but it's all true because it's all that you're seeing and other people are doing it too. And we're a community species. So it's kind of like if everyone's doing it, it's normal. So I'm fine. Like the
Right.
levels of I'm fine. Anyway, I kind of threw a bunch of stuff out there, but the bottom line is the mind is not where we're going to find the solution.
No.
Everyone is trapped in their little prison mind of fear, held hostage by fear itself, like the fear phenomenon that's also being continually put on the news. More fear, more separation, more fear, more separation. And everyone is really just doing the best they can in ridiculous circumstances for human mammals. Like, like we're doing pretty good, like considering.
Well, you know what I think is so positive and as an opportunity about what we're talking about here is the acknowledgement of this is what's actually going on is the first step to being able to process and move through it. And I know one of the things, like in the TMIC community that we're building right now is, and I like the way you just said it, our whole focus is helping people reconnect to themselves, to each other, and to nature. And when I say nature, I don't just mean the natural world that we've objectified and believed that we are not a part of. But I'm also talking about our own nature, because we are nature and we have a naturalness to us. And so the ability to connect to ourselves, others, and nature, and including our own nature, And you said two words that I thought were really kind of on point with what we are up to, which is creativity and connectivity through community. Creativity is when we are operating at our highest human expression, because as I say all the time, humans are natural creators. And we're creating whether we realize it or not. And we're not just talking about the arts, music, that kind of thing. We're talking about your life. Everything in your life is your creation,
Yeah.
because you've as creator called things into existence, made choices, connected with that person or not, taken that job or not. Like everything is an act of your creation. The problem is most people are creating from a place of unintentional reactive default,
Mhm.
as opposed to creating from a place of intentional, responsive
Mhm.
design, right?
Yeah.
So
Super
that's,
creative.
we even use the words responsive design in the tech world, right? You're able to respond by design to whatever's happening in the variables out there. And so we're creating this community of people reconnecting to their creativity and doing it as a part of community. And I'm just sort of realizing through our conversation right now that this is needed more than ever, because without this, people are just sitting, ruminating in their own fear bubbles
Yeah, there's so
and putting up
much chronic
defenses.
survival. Yes.
Yeah.
Which makes terrible humans. Terrible. I
Yeah.
am really, I we're both, I'm responsible with my survival mechanism. So when I'm in a fear response, when I know that I can be arrogant, I know I can be
Yeah.
stingy, I know I will make you wrong. And I'm really smart, so I will make you wrong and like I'll be right. Like I know how ugly I can get. But most people don't want to look at, to your point of like bringing consciousness to it. Let's just look at this.
Yeah.
Here's who I am when I'm in fear. That's
Yeah.
actually a great exercise. Everyone could like when I'm in fear,
Yeah.
here's how I behave with others. Here's the voices I call myself. Most people are either self-harsh or they're outside harsh, like they're
Yeah.
mean somehow, right? Because of the lack of love and connection. They're in fear. Like my cat, when she thinks there's a threat, will just attack the out of my ankle. We do that. We're like, no, you love this person. Nope,
Yeah.
fear, threat, it's unlogical.
Hmm.
It's not logical. But anyway, I lost track of because I started thinking about fear, humans in fear and how ridiculous they are. But yeah, being conscious of how we are when we're in fear will actually equip us to be able to be in more connection, creativity, and community because we're like, oh, when I'm in fear, I am like this. So
Right.
then it's not a shame response. So then we're not creating conflict because you're in fear and you're spilling over into your life from this reactive place. But we've been taught a lot of stupid stuff, the toxic
Mm.
positivity and how are you? I'm
Mm.
fine. How's everything going? It's staying busy. Cool. Like I
Or you
think
meet these
that's a
people.
goal.
Yeah. Or you meet these people and you say, how you doing today? And their first response is, oh, bless or blissful or whatever. And I'm like,
Is
that
it?
may or may not be true, but I'm suspecting not. Like it feels like, not that we always have to have something wrong, but it
No,
seems over
no.
the top, right? It just
Yeah.
seems like people don't usually talk that way. So it seems a little contrived, you
Yeah.
know?
Anyway, but the lack of authenticity. So like at our true
Yeah.
nature, which is nature that's commoditized and objectified and used for our own benefit isn't nature. Like that's
Hmm.
just
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
nature is nature. COVID
Yeah.
just showed you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, oh, do you have power over that? Like, it's very humbling, and I don't think the human ego likes that. Like, if you're,
Right.
but your spirit does. When you're part of nature, you're
Yeah.
insignificant and infinitely amazing at the same
Yeah.
time. And you can't
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
from the mind.
No.
Can't
No.
manufacture that.
No. No. And we're such a left brain world. So I was having this last weekend. I'm working on a Substack right now. Um, just let me riff for 2 seconds on this because I think
Sure.
I don't want to over philosophize everyone, but here's the thing. I think philosophy, which we speak of culturally, as a culture, sort of in a pejorative way, like, oh, that's so philosophical. Let's get practical, right? We always want to be practical. But I
Mhm.
don't think there's anything more practical than understanding the philosophical, sourceful essence of why you do what you do. because to me, once you understand that source, it can change the trajectory practically in reality of what you're doing and how you show up. Okay, so I was thinking about this, and I don't want to give a whole lecture because that's the point of my Substack, but the whole notion of reason and things being rational and us basically saying to each other, oh, that's so irrational and that's a pejorative statement. It's like there's something wrong with you. This too, reason is actually a language. Okay. So the word logic comes from the Greek logos, and logos means the word. And when we talk about the word, this came out of ancient Greece when the original alphabet with a
We talked about
th,
this last time.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah.
moved into the Greek and became the alphabet, and logic was born. So logic is a language and a system, just like math is a language and a system. But the important thing to understand is it isn't who we are.
No.
It's a language we're using to interpret phenomenon in the world. And when you go to other countries, other cultures, they're not operating from logic. They do things that we would look at in the West and go, well, that's illogical, right? It's kind of almost like Star Trek with Spock, everything needed to be logical, right? See, that was a language that he used to interpret and understand the world that affected his perception. The point I'm making is that life is not logical. We apply a logical criteria onto nature and life. And when it doesn't show up as logical, we get pissed. We enter fear because it's, oh, wow, the system I used to predict this thing didn't work, right? The language I used to predict it didn't work. Yeah.
Yeah. And people don't like to feel helpless. But if you feel part of a whole, you won't feel helpless. You won't feel alone. You will feel incredibly resourced. Like we talked about the squirrel last time, like that squirrel, like has this intrinsic sense of go find the nut, go seek shelter, go like it's not worried about its survival. It's equipped for its survival in its being. And we worry about things that like I don't have to worry about my cells dividing right now or my heart beating right now. But I think if people could, they would. I think if they could.
Well, and some people do.
Well, that's true. And in some circumstances, I do have a friend who has a heart condition, and I know the reality of that level of contracted worry. But it's the thing there, he's the most alive, present person ever.
Yeah.
Because he's like, my freaking heart is beating.
Yeah.
I'm alive.
Well, I went through that a year and a half, 2 years ago almost now, when I was diagnosed with a moderate heart disease condition. And it's not far enough along where they're like, oh, you need all these, surgeries and all these pharmaceuticals and stuff. So, but it was like, oh, wow. Now, here's the thing I said to myself, I'm like, but we're all going to die, and all that, and whether it happens sooner or later, we try to rationalize and be like, oh, he died young, he died old, or she died young, she died old. That's us labeling it. She died, he died, and it happened when it happened, right? And it's illogical. So coming back to this, not everything needs to fit into the logic frame. But I agree with what you're saying. I went through this moment of sort of fear around, and it was weird. It crept up on me. It wasn't like conscious, like I wasn't consciously dwelling on it. It hit me out of nowhere. And I had to process that. And then it took me a couple months. And on the other side of that, I actually got to a place where I was like, you know what? I'm just going to live my best life. What the heck can I do? I make good choices with my health, my diet, my exercise, and that's all I can do, you know? And there was a relief in that.
Yeah, it can shock us into, I'm only going to be Jenna right now. Like I've done all the spiritual stuff and it's like, you're an infinite being, blah, blah. But I'm only going to be Jenna today. You're only going to be like the great news about fear is that it can shock you into presence.
Yeah.
But not if it's fake fear. Like when you're actually like, oh my God, my heart might stop. And you're like thrust into that actuality. What the fear people are doing is all the voices in their head. It's this play in their head that they're responding to. And so their whole system isn't coming online to deal with the threat because it's just this play they're playing out. Do you know what I mean? So like when we're when I've actually gone through crazy life experiences, a tornado, my dad's suicide, my like I because I'm not worrying about it and thinking about it and blah blah blah, like I would have the resources to deal with it at the time. And if I didn't have
Hmm.
it at the time, I would eventually be brought into presence to have those resources when I could handle the challenge, which is
Right.
the beauty of nature. It's
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
just the design of nature. But we have separated ourselves from nature and then we're wondering why we're having such a hard time.
Totally. Totally. Well, here's another distinction that I think on the topic of fear that's important. Something I've been distinguishing recently, which is there's fear and then there's anxiety. And the distinction as I see it is fear is a response that you have in the moment of something occurring, whereas anxiety is fear about an unknown, uncontrolled future.
Yeah.
So it's still
Reactive
fear,
to the
but
thought.
it's oriented towards the future, right? And I think that we're seeing people in a constant state of fear, but it's fear about the unknown of the future. So really what we're talking about is anxiety all over the place. People are just dealing with chronic anxiety.
Yeah, I call that reactive emotions versus authentic emotions. So, a reactive emotion is I think a thought, I'm going
Mhm.
to die tomorrow. If I believe that thought and I give attention to that thought, I'm going to have a reactive emotion of panic or whatever.
Yeah,
But me believing the thought is what created the emotion.
exactly.
Something's happening. An
Yeah.
authentic emotion is something that arises from who you are. It's a feel, you need to feel that grief. You need to feel that sadness,
Yeah.
like an ache. It's actually what makes us alive. So when we can start to
Yeah.
deal with like emotion, right? That energy and motion and the aliveness and the
Hmm.
intersection of creativity and emotion, which makes us, or like it actually, we're in fear. Emotion makes us really bad in all of the best ways. Emotions is what makes us great, you know,
Yeah.
as humans. Like that's why there's
Yeah.
songs, that's why there's all this kind of stuff. But anyway, the authentic emotion is meant to be felt. It knows
Hmm.
what it's doing, just like your heart is beating or just like you're digesting your food. The reactive emotion needs to be managed, needs to
Yeah.
have attention brought to it, starve the thought, manage the mind, know that you have a mind, not it has you. And people weren't taught this.
That's right.
When I do workshops and I'm like, here's how to manage your mind, you could just feel the palpable relief.
Hmm.
Like, oh,
Hmm.
there's nothing wrong with me.
Yeah.
Everyone else does this. This is just what my mind does. Because people will identify, I am an overthinker. Oh, it's just how I am. I'm like, dude, it's how all left brain thinking people in fear are. You're not
Hmm.
special with your
Yeah.
overthinking, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But, you know, like, anyway, there are simple things that we haven't been taught as human beings of how to be an empowered human being.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder sometimes, like I look at our education system right now and what it's teaching kids. And, unfortunately, it's a system and structure and content that is frankly, even at this moment, completely outdated and irrelevant because on the verge of artificial intelligence, most of the stuff we're learning in school, we're not even going to need to know. AI is going to know it, deal with it. We can go find the answer. We know how to find the answer. There's no point in memorizing it. What we should be teaching kids is this stuff,
Yes.
how to be human, how does the mind work? What is the role of our emotions? How do we master these things for ourselves so that our mind isn't thinking us, but we are actually in control of it. And I don't know, Jenna, I think there's something we should be doing about this. Somebody
Hmm.
needs to be talking
I'm gonna
about
start
this.
entire careers are about this.
Like, um, I mean, I'm often struck with what we're doing with TMIC, and I'm inviting everyone listening to come check us out, work with Jenna, work with myself in the programs, because as part of our whole life architecture programs, Jenna is available and accessible as part of the work that we do if you want that one-on-one touch. And then we do the community stuff through our programs and stuff. But the point of why we're doing this is to hold space and to create a container, a community-based container. This whole idea of self-help is a misnomer. None of us can help ourselves because we have this thing in our brain that wants to predict, wants to control, wants to know, wants to think us. and will always give us the out and the exit ramp for why we shouldn't transform or change ourselves. So we need
It
each
thrives
other.
alone. It
It,
thrives alone.
it thrives alone, but our being, what you're talking about, that spiritual, emotional side of us, does not thrive alone. It
It thrives.
dies alone.
Yeah. Yeah. And this toxic independence, it, we're not even going to do a conversation about why this has all come about, but it's a little bit strategic to keep us in
Separate.
fear. Yeah. Yeah. So that we're controllable. So when we want to,
Hmm.
we can start to choose small, choose, what thoughts do I want to think today? So I was speaking on the weekend, and one of my new favorite tools is this a generative thought? So if there's a looping thought, and you want to talk to this person about it and talk to this person about it and just keep feeding it energy, just stop. Is this generative? And what's cool is when we stop and look at something, our consciousness comes online and it will answer. Get the answer. And so then you can decide, some part of you will still want to like keep gnawing on the thing, but you can also unsubscribe from it. I call it unsubscribing from thoughts. People can start with that now. Do I want to be thinking this thought? Because if you say, who do you want to be today? That can be a bit of a big stretch, but like, do I want to keep thinking this thought? That's possible. No. And then if it comes up again, just think, oh, no. And then you get started with starting to be like, who do I want to be today? What thoughts do I want to entertain? And subscribing is a great way because, the email comes into your phone, whether it's been consensual or not at this point. And you were like, unsubscribe. Like you're given that right.
Yeah.
But we don't do that with thoughts.
No.
We could though. I do. I'm like, oh,
yeah.
That thought. Oh,
yeah.
Close the file. And I learned from in the Oneness University spiritual tradition, I learned from this monk there named Doug, which is fun that his name is Doug.
Doug the monk.
Doug the monk. He described this very well, that we have a thought sphere.
Yeah.
Every thought that has ever been thought is like it's around the thought sphere. Our minds are, and this wasn't, he didn't get into this, but then later, like our minds are receivers. And so what most people are doing is they're unplugged from their infinite creator mind, internet, let's call that the internet. And they're just working on like this old laptop. And they're frustrated that it's not working and they're making it wrong, it's not working, but they're just, all they need to do is expand out and plug in. And we're designed to be receivers. Like you don't have to buy anything from Apple to be a receiver. You don't have to cold plunge or, sometimes all those things can help if they feel authentic, but it's already all here now. Our mechanics of being receivers of infinite intelligence, because it's what we're part of. And all of these other things, like the connection, the community, are like a microcosm of that, like an improv class, or what I mean? Just people around a campfire chatting, talking about their dreams. So it's like, whenever you're feeling funky and you just like go out and do something, you have like really genuine interactions, even with the lady at the teller, you forget about yourself. You forget about this little mind that's separate, that toxic independence of like, I have to do it on my own. And you feel the connection. You're not even thinking about connection. You didn't plan on the connection. You could feel palpably the relief. I don't know about you, but every so often when I'm in my head too much, and then I just go out my day, and then I like talk to the lady at the cash, and then I go there. Then I call my friend, and then I'm like,
you're not in your head.
I'm like living.
Life's great when you're not in your head.
Yes.
And this is the tragedy of this moment. And this is something that we are standing in and holding space for and creating solutions for, which is, I look at the way we've structured our society, where we're all in our own independent, isolated little bubbles. I think of sort of like the average day. So, people who say are going to their jobs, they get into, their car, which is in their garage. They back out of their garage. Nobody knows their neighbors anymore. And we drive in a solo bubble, to our place of work, and we park in the parkade and go to our little cubicle or our office or whatever the case is. And yes, there are other people in the office, but we're working alone most of the day, doing whatever our task is. Sure, we interact with people at the water cooler. Maybe we go grab a coffee with someone, So there's these little vignette moments of connectivity, but very little of it is deep and profound and at the level or scale that we, from an emotional being, from a spiritual being, actually require. And so I know you're saying, we didn't want to really talk about it, and I don't think we have to go deep into it, but just understand that the very structure of our society has created conditions that keep us isolated, alone, and then fearful.
Consumers.
Isolated, alone, and fearful, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so the flip is, how can we, and so this is the challenge for people like me and maybe like you and others. I don't want to live in that world anymore. I
Yeah.
actually don't want to live in a world where I'm in an isolated bubble. I want to live in community, but getting from here to there is a challenge because the structure is so ingrained that you almost have to disconnect from that structure. And then there's all kinds of things that are challenges that need to be overcome with that, because the sense of security, the sense of access,
Yeah.
and belonging, even though it's a false belonging, you have to give all that up in order to create something new. So it's a very, challenging situation to be in, even though we know we're all quote unquote dying in this structure.
Yeah.
Very few people have the bravery to step out of it and say, let's create something different.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there has to be enough. It's like, what suffering are you picking, right? Like, it's like, most of my clients find me when everything they've done stops working. And their system in their mind that has made them successful, the overachieving, the overthinking, the like productivity, blah, blah, blah. It's just like stops working. It's just like, whatever.
Yeah.
This doesn't light me up anymore. And then they're like, what else? What else is possible? And because they're just so over the other thing. And I think that is the prime moment for creation. Like, so over it. This is boring. This
Yeah.
thing
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
I'm just so over it. What's this thing over here? And now I have this intrinsic energy to put towards that, regardless of my mood or circumstance, right? Like that's when we
Mm-hmm.
really start to have transformational change versus those incremental changes, which
Mm-hmm.
we're more interested in. And I do think, there can be someone who is so connected to themselves and nature, get in their car, not lose their connection, go to the water cooler and have this like stupid superficial chat about nothing because no one knows how to show up authentically. And I'm not saying that
Right.
it's judgment. I'm saying no one wants that for themselves. But someone else could be totally authentic and totally present within that superficiality. Um, and being with that person, regardless of the superficial chat, that we can do it now within the
Yeah.
current systems as well. And I
Right.
work with clients a lot on that. Like, I worked with a shaman, Mandaza from Zimbabwe, who said, peacemakers don't go where there's peace. And I do think there's just a lot of like stealthy, present light work change makers put in the systems that are like present and connected and not subscribing, and they're in the systems as well while we're building this other thing. And so there's the two camps, right? Like, oh, I'm called to build this other thing, but there's also people that are lit up and present within the system.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that is another reality too, that
Yeah.
those are more of my clients. And it's
Yeah.
really cool because when you teach them their technology and you help them heal their heart and heal the old residue, they're present and they're powerful and they're affecting change in their world and around them because of who they're being. It's really cool to see how it ripples out in
Yeah.
those microcosms within the system, which I think
Yeah.
will create change over time.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's, in the last few minutes that we have here, bring this big conversation we've had, and there's so many tangents we could go on. Let's narrow it into sort of interpersonal and romantic
Hmm.
relationships, because I think that, everything we're talking about is applicable to all of life, right? All of the different sort of ways that we think about our life. And in the case of interpersonal and romantic relationships, this is why I believe it's so important to do the work and to be plugged in to a body of work and a community of people who are supporting each other in this work, to get a sense of who you are authentically, not from a conditioned place. Because I can get in interpersonal relationships with people from a place of my conditioning, And I know when I'm coming from that place, because usually it's just two conditionings rubbing up against each other, and it doesn't last very long, and it doesn't work out, and it breaks down. And it breaks down because there's an inauthenticity that is at the source of why they're together in the first place, because both of them are operating from condition versus operating from an authentic self where they can express themselves. They have emotional sobriety. They're feeling their emotions. They have some, not mastery, that's a big word, but they have some awareness that they're starting to tap into. It can become mastery over time. But, you know, it reminds me of this lady one time who showed up at a yoga studio, and she was like, and I was doing yoga, and she's like, oh, really, you know, I need to be doing this more often, but I'm so bad at it. And it's like, well, you don't get good at something by not doing it, right? So it's just like, and by the way, it's not about being good, you know, at yoga. It's just about doing yoga and getting
That's
what
the
you get out
shame
of
of
it.
needing to be good at something in order to be impressive, in order to be the thing, in order to like have the people like you, but to feel deeply loved for who you are and be able to be silent together and to not be this representative is what we're talking
Yeah.
about. That
Well,
authentic.
yeah. And so in interpersonal relationships, we show up with that shame in the background, and that's what puts the conditions up in front of us for, you know, the
Which
mask
feeds the
that we wear,
shame because then you
which
think
feeds the
I'm only
shame.
liked because, you know, for
Yeah.
me, my defense mechanisms, survival mechanisms that then become success mechanisms of where I get validated were like the good girl and the smart one, and I'm a singer, so then I'm like super interesting and talented. But who am I if I'm not?
Hmm.
And who
Right.
am I if
Right.
I'm having a bad day? And who if I
Yeah.
lose my voice? And who am I if I can't help you? So that feeling of transactional love is so painful, and then to be able to go, you know, to do down the journey I went on, the journey you went on, of wow, I'm just enough. You know, I'm
Hmm.
enough now. And then there's the stuff you do from there. But
Hmm.
when you have transactional relationships based on your representatives, you will always feel shame. You will always feel the threat that once they find out, once they really see me, because you can't see you. And so
Hmm.
the only solution is for you to be able to really see you, but not from your mind, where you think if you really see you, you're going to see how fundamentally flawed you are. The irony is you're going to see how beautiful you are. Like when you
Right.
actually are able to have the bravery or courage or conditions to see yourself the way nature sees you, the way creator sees you, the way your essential self is, not your mind's
Hmm.
version of you. It's like it blows everything. It just dissolves all of it's like, oh, I need to be
Hmm.
this, I need to do that, I need to do that. But like, I was talking to this guy, but like, he's like, I have a Honda CRV, and he's like, yeah, I know there's some places, but they're like, what car do you drive? Like, it's a status thing, and I'm just like,
Hmm.
I don't care about them. I don't care what they think
Hmm.
about me, and I'm not as like a you. Just
It's
well,
irrelevant.
cool. Like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have a Porsche. I mean, they're cool. Like, so, like, am I gonna be like, oh, that's dumb? But like to be like, I'm important because I have this thing. You'll
Yeah.
never win.
They're
You'll never
fun
get
to
there.
drive. They're fun to drive, but that doesn't change who you are.
Yeah, you're not more worthy, but
Yeah.
that whole facade that people are connecting from. So then we look at relationships, what you were just talking about, and if you create relationship from what most people are used to, here's my representative, and here's your representative dating profiles, how you met your significant other. It's like you will never feel loved or lovable if that's what you think you need to be
Yeah.
continuing
Yeah.
on. And then that's why most relationships break down, something like COVID, where you're not being your representative anymore. You maybe not the whatever role you were at work, and it's just this disintegration of all these roles and things that we attach to. And like, you know, if no one feels lovable as they are, that would have created a lot of stress in relationship and potentially the desire to go get that somewhere else or
Hmm.
leave or whatever. And so we also saw that in COVID, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
as a continuation of our conversation, like the disintegration of the identities of worth and value. I'm valuable because, or I'm relating to
Yeah.
you from this place, but the lack of ability to just be
Yeah.
from who you
Yeah.
really are isn't that common.
Yeah. Well, you know, one thing that during the COVID period about an observation that I was making about relationships, and you mentioned it earlier, the sheer number of breakups and divorces and things that were going on. And so what happened? Okay, two people who were in a relationship with each other, married or otherwise, whatever their situation was. Now they're spending all this time in a single environment together, which incidentally is not in and of itself a bad thing. So like in my relationship, we spent, like everyone else, all our time together, but we actually thrived during COVID. Like our relationship actually got better. And but for most people that were dealing with this, I think their experience was like, normally if you think about an average day, especially for people who both work and they work, independently, not out of the house, they might only see each other like,
Couple hours.
2 or 3 hours a day,
Mm-hmm.
an actual meaningful. So that relationship can survive on being in each other's presence 2 or 3 hours a day. But if you go above that, you find out what the relationship really is, like what's under the surface of it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And you realize it really was a facade of a relationship in many ways, because we were able to show up for those 2 or 3 hours with our projected self.
Yeah.
But when we were spending 24 hours a day together, you can't keep the facade up very long, and people
Yeah.
find out what people really think and feel.
Yeah. And most people don't know how to be with
Yeah.
people really are, the good and the bad and the survival part. And I say this once I did psychotherapy training and ontological training. It's like the role with dating at this point, if someone's like past relationship, whatever, wherever they're in their thing, is you want to get to the point where you see the person's survival mechanism. Like you want to see who they are when it's non-ideal conditions.
Yeah.
And then you pick that. Because it's easy to pick all of the essence of someone. And women are, I think maybe men do this too, but they're notorious for like seeing their possibility, seeing their potential,
Yeah.
dating their potential. Oh, but he wants to do this. It's like, let's see them for who they are now, not in a judgy way. And then you want to look for who they are when they're in survival, because that's what you're saying to in terms of relating and connecting. But that doesn't make someone less lovable.
No.
You have to decide, can I deal with that? Like,
Can I deal with that? Yeah.
I don't like who I am in my survival mechanism. I don't like it's not our best representation of who we are, but it's going to happen. And so love is unconditional, so, most people don't know how to love unconditionally. But anyway, yeah,
we like that as a theory and as a story.
It sounds great. It makes for good movies. It also makes for bad relationships too, because then people rationally will rationalize bad relationships, because in the name of loving unconditionally, but they're abandoning themselves.
Yeah.
So it becomes a big hot mess. But we're doing our best to cut through it and give people tools. Because at the end of the day, you can always have this primary relationship with yourself, not in a toxic, independent way, that allows for you to deeply connect with others, that fulfills that sense that something's missing. When I was talking on the weekend, I said, the only thing missing is you. Like that feeling that something is missing. It's not
It's you. You're holding back.
You.
Yeah.
You.
Yeah.
And to explore that. And then the stuff we're talking about helps people to reconnect those pieces that are already here, already now, already who they are.
Yeah. No, great. Well said. Well, then I think as we kind of wrap up, for those listening and watching, the invitation I want to leave everyone with is, if you are, and I'm guaranteeing most of you are, because it's just what's going on right now, if you are experiencing a sense of things don't feel great or in flow, or there's elements of my life that don't feel great or in flow, or you're feeling sort of at a loss of what to do, how to access your power, how to get out of fear. Maybe you have this chronic fear that's sort of bubbling up around an issue or something like that. The invitation is to realize that you don't have to do it alone, number one, that, what we're doing with our whole life architecture workshops is creating communities of people who can re-access, because we all had it as children, but re-access that creative side to yourself, re-access that emotional life that we mostly just kind of keep at bay and sort of like manage in the best case scenario, worst case, repress, suppress, ignore. That this is a container, an environment for this work, so that we can start to show up in life, in the structured, conditioned world we find ourselves in, more authentically ourselves, more creative. It doesn't mean you're never going to have a problem again. It doesn't mean you're not going to experience fear again, but you can get out of anxiety, and you can actually start to stand in who you are authentically and not have to wear a mask anymore. And so this is an invitation to do that work, and to do it not on your own. This isn't about just buying that, 7-step book that's going to, if you just followed the steps in your own isolated bubble, your whole life will be transformed. That's never worked. It's not going to work. It requires having dialogue, interaction, doing it with other people, getting creative, getting vulnerable, and allowing yourself to feel and not judge yourself for feeling. And then for those of you who might be dealing with really deep stuff that you feel like, I want to do that community work, but I also feel like I need some one-on-one time and some stuff to be able to handle a couple things that for you might just feel really, really tough. And maybe you're not ready to share it in a group setting or bring it up yet. That's what Jen is for. That's what she's here for. So we want to plug you into Jenna and her work to help you kind of think through and process that stuff so that you can participate in our whole life architecture community as your truest self. But so she's there to help you work through that.
Yeah. What aligns really well is that it is not about thinking through, but to bring the resources to match the challenge. So the challenge, I've done all the things and they stop working, manage the mind, understand the mind, but then also compassionately bring understanding and awareness, which is what you were saying, bringing up the resources to match the challenge of your ability to feel feelings all the way through, of your ability to know your own resources, your heart center, your aliveness. And then you're going to feel naturally inclined to connect. You're going to feel intrinsically confident because it's no longer about how you show up as your representative. The deep, authentic you is then accessible. And then the healing that needs to happen is, I just wanted to add that, like the resources.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
Challenge versus it's definitely not about thinking it through, but providing enough compassionate insight to go, of course you felt that way. Of course you reacted that way. You didn't do anything wrong. Like, people need to hear more of that. They're really harsh with themselves. And now they have the compassion to connect and feel safe to do so. But anyway, so it really works well together.
Yeah. Yeah. And the last thing I want to say is, there's this delicate balance between seeing everything as trauma and it becomes an overused thing. And I think we've kind of hit that moment right now where everything's a trauma. And the problem we have in this society is that so many of these kinds of words get so overused that eventually they lose their meaning. And we fail to be able to identify what is truly a trauma versus really what's just maybe an inconvenience that you're ignoring and not dealing with. You're just stressed.
I was getting a massage and her daughter was like, oh, I created my own trauma about this guy not texting her back. It's like, I was like, can you
not a trauma.
Tell her that's not what trauma means? In my small way, like, because now we don't have the tools to deal with trauma, which means you can't override it with your mind, which means like you need community and anyway, the resources to meet the challenge. But
So, but on the flip side, I also want to encourage everyone to consider the possibility and explore the possibility. And I would encourage you to explore it in TMIC's work and with Jenna and our work together and everything, that we all came out of a pandemic. This is where we started the podcast today. And so I kind of want to end there. Yeah. And there is a collective trauma on our society, a society that we've all experienced at some level as individuals and then collectively. And just wanting to get back to 2019 and kind of pretend that didn't happen is the classic way of handling things we don't want to handle. It's like, just put it away, bury it, pretend it never happened. Let's not deal with that. That's only going to creep up in our lives at some point because it needs to be integrated. It needs to be processed. It needs to be managed. And so consider how in your own individual life, how might you have, I don't want to say you have because it's different for everybody, but how might you have done that? Or might you still be doing that? And how might that be affecting your ability to stand in your power, in your creativity, in your authenticity, and actually create a life of integrity. So maybe you don't know the answer to that and you want to explore that. That's another thing that Jen and I can help you do. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, what life do you want to live? Like, what makes you feel alive? Like, just
Yeah.
and then by having that, all throughout COVID, I was like, well, what do I want? Like, what do I want? I know you have a thing with the word want, desire, and everything, but I mean, want helps me get there. Oh, I want to have more of this. I want to have less that. I want to,
Mhm.
and that will help you see the blind spots of like, some of my clients are like, oh, I can't even imagine a peaceful day. So really
Mhm.
what they want is like more peace. Oh, okay. So what are the conditions that'll create more peace? And now we start being able to co-create our lives, really
Mhm.
small and
Mhm.
doable steps. But
Mhm.
the collective survival mechanism, trauma response on a collective level. I've been a therapist for 15 years, right? And I've never seen a collective trauma, like, I mean, because it's also unprecedented, but I've never seen anything like it. It was just to see everybody in survival mechanism. Like, I would see people in survival
Mhm.
mechanism when they were in survival mechanism, but to see collective survival mechanism was astounding. So just know
Yeah.
nothing's wrong with you. You're having a normal reaction to a crazy circumstance, and that there are ways out of it and resources
Yeah.
to match the challenge that you were never
Yeah.
equipped to deal with on your own. So
Yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not like you're less than because you
And acknowledge the world has changed as a result of it. And people
totally
don't
changed.
do change very well.
No, they
So if
don't.
you're struggling doing change, that's where we can help out. We're working with people all the time who are like, I want to create the next phase of my life. This world is different than what I was used to and what I was experiencing. And so now it's up to me to make the decision that I, as creator, am going to decide what the next part of my life looks like. And it's part of it is releasing the past.
Mhm.
So we can get into all that as well. But, it's
Cool.
just important to realize you're not alone. You don't have to do this alone. We're here to help. We're here to help just on a one-on-one basis. We have a community of people that are doing this together. And we want to create what's possible for you as an individual, but us as a community, us as a collective. And where do we go from here? So that's an invitation to those of you. And you can go to tmicglobal.com for more information of how to connect to whole life architecture, or in the case of the Jungle and the Gardener, which is our relationship program. And Jenna's connected to both of those as well. So any last words, Jenna? I just wanted to wrap it up on the COVID piece, because I think that's what I'm really present to right now, that there's just this unhandled, unmanaged, truly collective trauma that's still working itself through
And
our
that's just the
society.
thing to know. Like, okay, we're all, I've been working, I'll say it was just a personal share because I find a lot of people are getting a lot out of that from me lately, that COVID turned on my overdoer in
Mm,
survival mechanism. Oh, well, I've got all this time. I just got totally hijacked. And then I came out of it and went, oh, no, 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 no. Joy matters. And I like being, and sitting on the hammock matters, and the space of being the creator. And so I've been really sort of really, really, really intentionally stepping back into doing less, feeling into things, and that those are
mm,
all skills and tools that we can learn, but unhooking from doing. And even the more I unhook from overdoing and overthinking, I still pull oracle cards, or I still get messages in my meditations and
mm.
ceremonies to do less. I'm like,
Yeah.
what are you talking about? I
How
just
much less can I do?
I'm like, but I have to write the article so the people read it, so that. And so I'm still like unhooking from
Yeah.
the doing and the have to, and it's all up to me-ness. But the creation in me wants me to create it, like all of it. So like stay tuned into that. So that's what I've been doing.
Yeah.
And it's working, but I'm still struggling with it. But everyone has something small thing they can do to start to work towards that. But like, I'm also healing my own survival mechanism, and I'm still on the other side of it going, oh yeah, source is source. Oh yeah, I'm infinitely supported. I'm going to know what to do, when to do it, and how, and just like calming myself more strategically than the overdoing, feeling safe because I've
Mm-hmm.
done the things. And if I do the things, then
Yeah.
I've been personally still healing from that. So,
Yeah.
it's just to
Yeah.
share that, like,
Yeah.
I'm a human doing it too. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Exactly. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. We will see you on our next podcast. And until then, just consider, right? Consider what you're really dealing with. Just sit with it. nothing to do about it necessarily yet, but just observe and see, when no one's looking, how are you really feeling about life, your life, what's going on, your relationships, your job, your career, whatever. And just give yourself the opportunity to step into being the creator of something fantastic and wonderful into the future. And we're here to help you do that. So until then, we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in.
That concludes this episode of The Most Important Conversations. This in-depth conversation could set you on the path to self-improvement, which is essential if you want to be an effective leader and take meaningful action in your life. If you enjoyed this episode and want more of these stimulating discussions, you can find them at TMICglobal.com. Remember, the world is at a crossroads right now. You can't afford to waste this opportunity to take charge of your life, build meaningful relationships with others, and co-create a brighter tomorrow. Thank you for listening. See you on the next one.